Hey youth, hope you're having a good Sunday. We miss you guys. Wish we was all together, but we're not. So we're gonna make the best of it. But I just want to talk few minutes about stay-at-home order. And he said we're now realizing that it wasn't our busy schedule was keeping us not to do for God, and we make our excuses to make ourselves feel better for not doing the things ourselves. And the young man was excited and said that all these things I've kept from my youth, what do I lack? And it says that Jesus said to him, if thou be made perfect or will be perfect, go and sell that thou hast and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasures in heaven, and come and follow me. It says, but when the young man heard this saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And we talked a little bit about this in our hyphen Zoom the other night about there's no telling the potential that this young man had, but he had his reasons, he had his excuses for why he couldn't follow Jesus, why he couldn't give up everything to follow him. He had his reasons. And then I got to thinking about Moses. We read in Exodus 3 where Moses is tending to his father-in-law's flock, and he comes to this burning bush, but it wasn't consumed. And it says that the Lord called unto Moses from the burning bush, told him to take off his shoes. The place you're standing is holy ground. And the Lord begins to tell him how he's seen the affliction of his people from the land of Egypt and the taskmasters, and he's heard their cries, and he's going to send Moses to deliver the people out of the land of Egypt. And here's where the excuses that Moses began to give. For one, he said that he wasn't qualified. In Exodus 3:11, and Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? And Jesus' answer says, certainly I will be with thee. So there was excuse number one. Number two is he felt that he lacked knowledge to feel the calling of God. And in verse 13, and Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, saying to them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and thou shalt say unto me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? Verse 14, and God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent you. So there was excuse number two. Excuse number three, he didn't believe that he could fulfill God's calling. In Exodus 4:1, and Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe nor hearken unto my voice, for they shall say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. So he's thinking that they're not going to believe him. So God tells him there's these signs that you should do if they don't believe you. He said to put your rod down. So Moses puts his rod down, and when he does, it becomes a serpent. And he says to grab it by the tail, and when he does, it becomes a rod again. And then he tells him to put his hand in his bosom, and when he does, he pulls it back out, and it's got leprosy all over. It's white as snow, and he says to put it back, and he puts it back, and he comes back, and it's flesh. And then the Lord tells him, he said, if these two signs don't work, he said, you shall take water from the river and you'll pour it on the dry ground. And when you do, it shall turn to blood. So God's basically telling him they're going to believe what you're saying, but that wasn't enough for Moses. Moses has to make up another excuse. He makes up an excuse that it couldn't be his calling. And Moses, in verse 10, and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither hereto nor since hast thou spoken to thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. So there's his other excuse. He can't talk plain, and he stutters, and that's his other excuse. And then God answers and tells him that, hey, I'm going to teach your mouth what to say. Each time he gives an excuse, God's basically telling him, hey, I'm going to be there with you, and I'm going to fulfill what I'm calling you to do. And then number 5, he basically just didn't want to fulfill his calling. Verse 13, and he said, O Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. So basically he's asking him to just send somebody else. Don't send me. Send somebody else to do this. I'm not qualified. I'm not able to do this. And I think of how many times we make excuses for why we can't do something for God. How many times we make excuses for the things that we do. There's those excuses for I don't do this, and then I make excuses for the things that I do. We had those moments like Paul, Romans 7:15. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that I do not. But what I hate, that I do. And here we see the sense that Paul has found himself doing the things that he doesn't want to do, doing the things that he doesn't approve of. This is what Paul's fallen into. In verse 15, it's a struggle that all mankind faces. It's a struggle between your flesh and your spirit. Paul desires to have his spirit and have it in control at all times, but sometimes that flesh wins out. We want to do the things of God, but sometimes it's hard to do the things of God because we allow our flesh to win out. To live for Jesus, the spirit has to overcome the flesh. Galatians 5:17 says, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one to another. So you cannot do the things that you would." And it's easy for us to make excuses. It's easy for people to make excuses for their actions, and it's easy for us to believe those excuses that we've made. We say these excuses so many times that I don't have time, or I can't do this, and we say it so many times that we begin to believe our excuses for why we don't do these things for God. And I don't want to miss out on God's calling over my excuses. I don't want any of you to miss out on what God's calling you to do because of excuses. I don't want any of you to be like those in the parable of the Great Supper in Luke 14. You see that they had their invitation, and they've been called to come to this great supper. And it says when they're called to come, that they begin to make these silly excuses that, I bought land and I've got to go see this land, and I bought this cattle and I've got to go see this cattle. You wouldn't buy land that you've never seen, and if you hadn't seen it, you done bought it, so it's not really important that you go see it. But they were making excuses to not go to the supper. And if you look, they send out invitations to other people, to the poor, to the lame, to these different people that they answered the call. They went to the supper. And I don't want any of you to miss out on what God has for you, the calling that God has for you. God wants to use each and every one of you, no matter how young or how old you are. God has a calling. But don't make so many excuses to where that calling is gone to somebody else, and somebody else fulfills what God intended for you to do because you refuse to do it. I just want to say that stop making excuses. You all have a little extra time here. It's time to get in the Word. It's time to learn more of the Word. But don't make excuses to God for what you don't want to do. If God has asked you to do it, like he was telling Moses, I'm going to be with you. I will give you the words to speak. I will make sure that they know that I've spoken to you. I'm going to bless you. And but just stop with the excuses. That's about all I've got. We love you guys, and we miss y'all. I want you to stay strong in the Lord, because I really believe that God's got mighty things in store for each and every one of you. Y'all have a good day.